Is it on? Okay, it's on. Okay, you're good. Turn that one off. Okay.
Good evening and welcome back. Hope you all had a good dinner and are ready for the Search for Life on Mars panel. We have Dr. Robert Zubrin, President and founder of the Mars Society, Jan Spacek, Stephen Benner, and Jim Bell. Welcome.
Hello. Yeah, it sort of works. Okay, so this is a panel to address the question of the search for life on Mars as it's currently being done, as it could be done, as it should be done, as it must not be done, in any which way. The panel, well, a lot of what we're going to talk about is the current and immediate future robotic Mars program and proposals for how that could be improved and also properly augmented by human exploration. Okay. I'll begin. I'm pretty critical about the current Mars robotic space program, even though I will readily concede it is one of the jewels in NASA's crown. It's a great program. The only other program in NASA that compares to it is the Space Astronomy program, which is a magnificent program. But I don't think that the robotic program, Mars program, or as it's generally called, the Mars Exploration Program, is currently optimally designed at all. Unlike the human the human spaceflight program, it's not an exploration program. It is a purpose-driven program. It is not a vendor-driven program. Its missions are designed to actually accomplish scientific objectives. Okay, that is, they don't just do missions in order to do missions, and if they can think of a scientific thing to do associated with it, well, that's fine. But basically, we're flying. You know, no, they have objectives, but the objective that they've selected is not the one that they have represented the mission to the public. To the public, they say, we are searching for life on Mars. Okay, that is what the NASA Public Relations Office always says about these missions. And the reason why they say that is because they are not stupid. They know that that is what the public is interested in Mars. Okay, but that's not what the missions are designed to do. They are primarily, for the most part, geological exploration missions. They're learning things about the geology of Mars. And then there's some other missions that, study the ionosphere or the earthquakes or something. But mostly it's the geology, and they map it from orbit with the, cameras and infrared and so on. And sometimes even do ground penetrating radar. And then from the ground, they've got the rovers, and they return magnificent photographs, as well as all sorts of measurements, quantitative, but they're not looking for life. Now, it's perfectly true that understanding the geology and therefore the history of Mars is extremely important for creating the context for a proper investigation of life on Mars. I'm not saying that the program is irrelevant to the search for life on Mars, but it is not a search for life on Mars. Okay, far from it. The last time a life detection instrument was sent to Mars was 1976. NASA has in fact avoided sending the rovers to places where it might accidentally encounter life on Mars. That is, a few years ago, the Curiosity rover was steered away from some places that were suspected of having liquid water seeping to the surface. Whether it really did or not is unclear, but the point is they didn't go to it, they went away from it. Okay, exactly the opposite of what you were doing if you were looking for life on Mars. Now, one of the impediments to the search for life on Mars has been the so-called planetary protection program. The planetary protection program, well, first of all, there's two ideas within planetary protection. One is to avoid forward contamination, that is contamination of Mars by the introduction of organisms from Earth. And the other is back contamination, that is bringing Martian microbes to Earth. Now, in all the missions to date, the only relevant issue has been forward contamination because we haven't brought anything back from Mars. Now, that is a possibility relating to both the sample return mission and human missions, but it hasn't actually played in the program so far as anything real. However, the forward contamination, forward contamination is the only one. But to avoid forward contamination, they impose much more rigorous restrictions on experiments. Well, first of all, they impose significant restrictions on anything that goes to Mars, but they also impose greater restrictions on A, life detection experiments, and B, or missions that say they're going to look for life, and also places where they can go. That is, to avoid places most likely, if you go to places that are most likely to have biology, then the restrictions are much more. In consequence, in order to avoid these extra impediments, people avoid life detection experiments and they avoid areas that might be biologically interesting. Now, the excuse given for this, or the rationalization, is that we must not, if we contaminate Mars with terrestrial microbes, it will become impossible to know if the life we find on Mars was native or whether it was brought by us. And therefore, it is claimed that these regulations are there to protect science. Okay, that is the claim that is made. And therefore, these are the protectors of science who are ruling out the scientific search for life on Mars. But first of all, I believe that this claim is has no basis for the following reasons. If you go to Mars and you detect biology, there's a number of possibilities. One is you detect something which is different than anything we've seen on Earth, either fundamentally different at the biochemical level, or simply something that does use DNA and RNA, but it's a species of bacteria that we have never seen before. So it's different in a less profound way. In either of those cases, you know you didn't bring it. Okay. Now, there's a third possibility. What if you find some life on Mars that is identical to forms that we commonly see on Earth? Find some E. coli or something. Okay. Well, then it's possible you might have brought it. How would you know whether you brought it or it was native? Because if it was native, it was there before you. That's what it means to be native, and therefore would have left residues on Mars, fossils, biomarkers, wastes. Okay, they would all exist. This is how we know there was life on Earth before we arrived. Okay, that we didn't bring it all. Okay, that all these lions and zebras and everything were not brought here by the ancient aliens who inspired us. No, we can find fossils of their ancestors here on Earth, so we know that we didn't bring them. And so there it is. So if it was native, it will have left biomarkers or fossils. But on the other hand, if you go to Mars and you find a type of microbe that is well known on Earth and there are no residues indicating a previous existence on Mars, then you brought it. There it is. And that's the answer to that. Okay. Now, it's certainly true that if you have a life detection experiment, you should sterilize it and so forth as a matter of laboratory discipline. But we search for life on Earth by going to the places where we think that life might be, not by avoiding it. And we know more about Earth than any other planet because we are here. I heard a discussion a couple of years ago of the Mars sample return, and it was claimed we needed to do the Mars sample return in order to find a place on Mars where there was no life. And so we could send, in other words, we wanted to avoid sending astronauts to places that could be biologically interesting. I would argue that if we're going to go to the expense of sending astronauts to Mars, we want to send them to the places that are the most biologically interesting. Okay, that's what, and if we're going to search for life on Mars with robots, we want to send them to the places that are most biologically interesting, not avoid them. And then, well, there's the back contamination issue, but that is not germane to this discussion, so I'll leave that aside. But suffice to say, we get 500 kilograms of Martian rocks landing on Earth every year, and we got more in the past, and this has been going on for 4 billion years, and it's a lot of rocks. And what the study of the Allen Hills meteorite did reveal, because it was very intensively investigated as a result of the claims and the debate, was that there were major portions of that rock that had never been raised above 40 centigrade during its entire career of injection from Mars crews through space or landing on Earth. So if it had microbes in it, they could have survived the trip, which means that if the Red Death could come from Mars, it already has. Okay, so that's back contamination, but that's another discussion. But anyway, what I say is this. I say NASA should be searching for life on Mars, and it isn't. And one of the reasons why it isn't searching for life on Mars is because there would be all sorts of impediments placed on that mission by forward contamination considerations. And so in order to protect science, we're not doing science. And this has got to change. So I'll leave it at there. So
Are we just supposed to jump in?
Are we supposed to argue?
okay, why don't you speak? Because you
Thank you for the opportunity.
represent the other extreme end of this table.
So, thank you, Dr. Zubrin. I want to start by asserting to you guys, I am not the NASA guy at this table, okay?
No,
I don't work for NASA. I work for Arizona State University. I am a frequent critic of NASA, okay? And in that respect, Dr. Zubrin, I agree with everything that you have said, except for most of it. So first of all, I totally agree with you. I do totally agree with you that the robotic exploration program, NASA's robotic, the global robotic exploration program, is not optimal. It's not as good as it could be. Totally agree with you on that. I take a rather different perspective, though. I think, who was it that, you go to Mars with the program you got. This is the program we've got.
that was Rumsfeld.
Yes, Rummy. Right. You go to Mars with the program you got. And many of us in the trenches in the science world propose instruments and missions that don't get selected for a variety of reasons. They're judged to be too risky. People have proposed to go to gully kind of landing sites, places where slope streaks and other potential evidence of groundwater They're extremely difficult just from an engineering standpoint to land on. And there's the planetary protection issue that you bring up. That's a real bugaboo, and it annoys a lot of us. So I find myself in agreement with a lot of your perspective in what you say. I wish we had a better program. I wish we had people on the ground working with robotics. I wish robotics was optimized to do the missions. I wish we could do more of them. I wish we could sample more of the diversity of Mars than the places that we have. The trend is in the right direction, in my opinion. The trend is in the right direction, getting into places like ancient lake beds, which were habitable environments, which are perfectly reasonable places where life could have been if it did exist on Mars, and where evidence of that life could be preserved. So I think that's a good idea. And while it's true that the Viking style biology experiments have not been reproduced, have not been reconducted in the time since Viking, I take exception to the points that you made and you made this morning, Stephen, that there are no experiments that can detect life on Mars. There is an active GCMS mass spectrometer in Curiosity. 36 times now we've taken samples drilled from the subsurface, not a lot of the subsurface, but some, and exposed them to that chemistry set, which can detect complex organic molecules. I sit there in anticipation every time when the new result's going to come out, because there could be something spectacular. Who knows, right? Could be something spectacular at pretty low concentrations. Maybe not as good as the Viking experiments, but still. So, I think there are experiments going. I mean, in some sense, we're searching for active life in any picture we take, right? How do we find ancient life on Earth? We're not finding the organisms. They're gone. There are no fossils before 550 million years ago, right? It was all soft-bodied organisms. What do the Precambrian geologists do here? They go to the very tiny fraction of Earth's surface that's left from 3.x billion years ago in Western Australia, Canada, Greenland, a few other places, right? And they're not looking for biologic organisms. They're looking for subtle chemical and isotopic signatures. They're looking for biosignatures like textures and stromatolitic kind of forms that colonies of biologic organisms had made a long time ago, and they got preserved in the geologic record. That's the evidence for ancient life on the Earth. And it's basically what we're trying to do with the currently active biology and biosignature experiments on Mars. Could we be doing more? Yeah. Could we be doing better? Sure. But I'm still super excited and delighted every time we present a sample to the GCMS on Curiosity, every time we put the Sherlock instrument, which can detect through Raman and fluorescence and other methods, can detect complex organic molecules. And we found the meteoritic population you guys are talking about. So that's exciting to me. And I think it's worth celebrating. Let's build on it. Let's make it better. And then the final point I want to make has to do with, what we should expect, right? There's no ozone layer. Hard UV is coming right to the surface. If there is extant life on Mars, and I totally believe there could be, especially if there's a water table, which we don't know much about. There's an ice table for certain in the subsurface. But if there's extant life there, it's got to get below that UV, and it's got to get not just below the UV and the surface layer, but that surface has been churned by impacts for billions of years. There's nowhere like that on the Earth that's had that kind of churning kind of exposure to the UV over most of its geologic history. And there is an oxidant, right? The perchlorate is there. The InSight mission found it. It's a strong oxidant, and that and the UV are making it exceedingly difficult for complex organic molecules like the ones we'd love to find to be detected at the surface and the subsurface that we can expose that deep today with the technology that's available to us. So you're bearish, I'm bullish. We agree on a lot, we disagree on a lot, but I'm still super excited and happy to be part of the program that we have.
So am I going to be the one who has to defend NASA? No, I'm happy to do so because as you might, as you certainly know, and also Robert and Jan, there are NASA and there's the community. Right, so NASA headquarters is a group of people who we both know, and some of them we count as our friends who are doing their level best to try to do what the mission calls for.
Right.
And every one of them, Mike Meyer had a conference in 2019 in Carlsbad, which he asked, how would we go about detecting extant life on Mars?
Yeah.
There was a report that came, he got the community together. Of course, that was in November of 2019. For those of you who don't have a good sense of history, that was 3 months before COVID hit. And so, of course, everything went on hold. Yeah, that's a world ago. But no, but then, of course, what NASA will do is they will try to go out to the community and try to get peer reviews to come. The community provides proposals that NASA does. Well, NASA will occasionally provide proposals in the science area, but they will be general areas. So it's different from the actual launch missions, which are much more coming from it's an entirely different world of how those are generated. But the science community are the ones who provide the mission proposals to do science on Mars or elsewhere. And then they're peer reviewed by the community, and NASA headquarters, the NASA itself, the organization doesn't do much more than what the community guides it to do. Now, I, of course, I remember my very first time on a Mars architecture sample return mission, which was 1999, when I was a young man and could therefore be participating in the mission, which was going to take Steve Squires, again, most of his career.
It's just a decade away.
Yeah.
Just a decade away.
So the bottom line is that, we had a discussion where we told the people, and Charles Lalachi was in the room. It was all of the people who and are now retired, that the Viking GC mass spec was incorrectly interpreted. There were organics on Mars. They wouldn't have found them. The oxidant, if it is perchlorate, which of course it is, was certainly active at 400 degrees when they were pyrolyzing the samples. But perchlorate is a mild compound, doesn't do anything. We do physical organic chemistry studies in perchlorate at room temperature because it's a very strong oxidant thermodynamically, but it's not a kinetically active oxidant at all at room temperature. Different if you put it into fireworks
and give it billions of years to work.
Well, that's true. But the bottom line is that there is a possibility out of all of this that when this, so I remember when we proposed this and Squires had on his machine, the laser Raman back in 1999 to detect it. I went home saying, oh, this is great. They're going to detect the molecules. And Squires had told Alachi, yeah, this is going to detect Benner's. I learned a bad lesson then that the only important meeting that you were supposed to go to at NASA was the last meeting, because that's the meeting when they take all of the equipment that you thought was going to fly off. They descope.
Yeah.
And if you think you've been to the last meeting, they'll schedule another meeting afterwards and then they'll descope. But this is part of the peer review process. And I don't think NASA can be fundamentally criticized at that level, except to the extent to which the community is generally, the community is the community. You work with the community that you've got, to quote Rumsfeld. But I guess what annoys me, and it really is an education problem, is that we have trained a generation of students who are now in leadership roles. And now I'm retiring, getting old and about to fall out of a leadership role. We're not training them to evaluate evidence, understand argumentation, do the logic correctly, such that we can have in 2021 a official report on life detection coming out of NASA, where the first three statements are incorrect about what was being done in Australia to detect microbial fossils, what was done in Viking to detect life on Mars. These were all statements that were culturally statements. They were not factual statements. And that can be written into a report. Now, one last point for Robert, right? Microbial fossils are very difficult to characterize. So if you get a person who is looking at an Australian sediment for 3.5 billion year old fossils, they will argue about this forever. And I'm not sure that I could go to Mars and look for the traces of ancient fossils if they are microbial fossils without having a very deep understanding of the geological context, which is sort of what you said. But the point is that microbial fossils are difficult to characterize, which is why we turn to chemistry to do them. And of course, that's where Jan comes in.
Okay. So I would say to Robert that sending humans to Mars will not make searching for life impossible, but in some ways it will make searching for life harder. In some ways it might make it easier. Harder because you, with bringing humans to Mars, you will bring more bioload contamination. So you will need to do that distinction, whether it's native Martians or forward contaminations. Easier, on the other hand, humans have hands that can directly communicate without lag because of the speed of light between Earth and Mars. So in some ways, I think that it might be good idea to start looking, as Robert said, for life before we go there. Maybe question for Jim and maybe for the rest of the panel. What do you guys think about the fact that on the one hand, NASA is very serious about planetary protection up until year 2040, when they decided before 2040 we are sending humans there. So to me, it seems like paradoxical situation. We are very strict, no excuses for any, like not sterilizing any probes, but we have to go there anyway. So we will relax all of the sudden all of these precautions. So for me, I have no problem with relaxing the precautions to send humans there, but from the point of logic of NASA, why we have not relaxed them before to allow more missions going and search for the life. So gentlemen.
Yeah, and I agree. It's paradoxical. I think part of it is, in my opinion, part of it is a realization that human exploration is going to happen eventually. It's hopefully in the 30s, not the 40s, but anyway. Honestly, some aspects of planetary protection have been relaxed. It seems to be a function of the planetary protection officer and their aggressiveness and particular approach towards this. But over the course of my career in the instrumentation that I've been involved in sending to Mars, in the trenches again, at the level of the requirements you have to meet, it has been relaxed over time. So that's just, some empirical experience. Is it still annoying? Yes. I agree with what Bob started out with, that, the chances of contamination are probably very low. They design, as most good engineers do, they design to worst case scenario, right? They design to, we're sending the spacecraft with a nuclear payload to a gully, and it's going to crash with no deceleration and create an enormous explosion and contaminate the groundwater with plutonium, right?
And what's wrong with that?
Yeah, what's wrong with that? What could possibly go wrong with that? But
Well,
that's,
it won't wipe out Martian life.
it's a public relations disaster. You touched on that, right? You touched on that they're worried about messaging. They're worried about making sure the public is going to go along with what we want to do. So yeah, I agree. Lots of paradoxes. I'll be glad to see it relax completely, because that means people are going or they're there.
I mean, I've been on many of these planetary protection committees, and I'm quite convinced that the number one reason they exist is so that when the NASA administrator goes to Congress and the congressman asks, what about planetary protection issues? The NASA can say, we have a panel of experts who has worked on this.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And that's perfectly reasonable. It's how you manage the public relations, because there are people out there, you can go onto a web page any day now and read people who say that there is this problem. And so the NASA administrator has to be able to say, we have a panel working.
Yeah, except that, and that, I mean, I've been to plenty of those things with the planetary protection. People say, we're here to protect you from the demagogues. From at that time, it was the 90s, is Jeremy Rifkin, the people of this ilk who would say anything. And people comparable to those who were picketing the Galileo launch because of the hypothetical risks and so forth. Why, one of them is here over there? No. But at the same time, they would then propose extreme measures. Okay. that, first of all, I mean, if you were to do a study of the sample return mission, and I strongly believe this should be done, where you say, design a Mars sample return mission with no planetary protection requirements incorporated into it. How would you design that? And what would it cost? And the answer is, you could design and have a 2-stage Mars ascent vehicle with a capsule and an MER-sized rover, and you could land it on Mars, and it could go out and grab a sample and put it in the capsule and shoot it straight back to Earth. Okay. In other words, the whole requirement of having to break the chain of contact with the surface, which means you need a whole nother spacecraft in Mars orbit and need to do an autonomous rendezvous and dock to transfer the sample, that would not be in the mission. Okay. Now, putting that extra spacecraft in the mission greatly increases the cost of the mission, greatly increases the risk of the mission, both because of failure of the launch or operation of that spacecraft itself, as well as the possible failure of the rendezvous of the 2 spacecrafts in Mars orbit. And now there are even people saying that the sample, when it comes back, shouldn't go to Earth. Bill Nelson said it should go to the Lunar Gateway. Okay, because there's too much of a risk of back contamination. So the whole point of the sample return mission is to take a sample from Mars and bring it to Earth, where it can go to 1,000 university laboratories where there's 1,000 scientists with 1,000 instruments, and they can look at it this way, that way, and every which way. Okay, not so that it could go to a small space station where there's a couple of astronauts who are not even professional scientists with a limited suite of instruments looking at it there. So there you have the planetary, and also in the discussion that I was in, the planetary protection people wanted to incorporate a requirement that if there would be health monitoring equipment on the capsule as it came back to Earth. And if, as it came back to Earth, we no longer had assurance that it was contained in the capsule. In other words, we don't have positive indication that the capsule has broken open, but we no longer have the health monitoring equipment assure us that it hasn't, then a circuit should be activated to sterilize the sample through heat. Okay. Now, just imagine this. You're spending billions of dollars of the taxpayers' money. You're spending decades of waiting by the scientific community to bring back a sample from Mars, and then you fail to get a health monitoring signal from the spacecraft, and you decide to sterilize the sample, which, okay, A, if there was life in it, you have just destroyed the most important scientific data that was in the sample. B, if there isn't life in it, you've altered the chemistry, okay, and you've damaged the sample, okay, all to please this conceit. And these people, they you know, when they're among the scientific community, say, we're your friends, we're just here to protect you. But then they start levying requirements on the mission that have turned the mission from a mission into a vision. And and furthermore, well, I'll leave it there. But I do want to bring up another point, which is this, which is if the purpose of the Mars exploration program is to find life on Mars, is focusing it on sample return the correct strategy? Okay. In other words, right now, the entire program is this sample return mission. We're going to spend a decade on this and so forth, when for the same money, you could have, well, much more diverse program involving rovers, orbiters, helicopters, whatever, balloons, you know, ground penetrating radar missions, drilling missions, and you name it, that might have a much greater chance of discovering life on Mars than bringing back a few kilograms that were gathered.
So
from
I
the
should have
surface.
now just spent the Mars, the sample, the planetary protection people as well. But I can't do it, right? But John, go ahead.
So just to make a point about absurdity about the sample return, this is not Martian rock, but we have one rock very similar to this in our laboratory, and about a month ago, and I handled it like this. So that brings the point about the contamination, the backward. We get Martian rocks from Mars back to Earth all the time, as Robert said many times, but I just want to put it in a perspective that, if we bring it in the rocket, we have to destroy it if it breaks seal, but if it's flying natural way, we can just handle it. Okay, so.
And I think Robert also I can't defend the planetary protection in the reverse sense, Mars to Earth. I've tried. I have a good high school debate training where I'm allowed or taught to take both sides of every issue. And I've tried to defend the statement that you don't want to have Mars rocks coming to Earth without control when they are landing in the Sahara Desert every day, and I can buy them on eBay. Or some of them are actually real on eBay. So yeah, right. One really has a hard time arguing this. I mean, the forward contamination problem to have an issue on the science, I think, is a more defensible case I can make.
Yeah, I think I can make a good devil's advocate about the forward contamination from Earth to Mars regarding actually contaminating Martian biosphere. Like Robert's favorite argument is that we have a Canadian goose going back and forth between United States and Canada. The same goes with life between Earth and Mars, transported on impact ejecta. But we can make same argument that, for example, in Australia, we have an exchange of life happening all the time. But until we brought mammals to Australia, the life in there was developing. So I don't see a problem that we would wipe out Martian biosphere by bringing humans and their microbiomes to Mars, but we can definitely alter it. So that would be the contrapoint to Robert's argument. But even if that was supposed to happen, in my personal ethic codex, that's still something that will happen eventually. So we,
But Yelena, if your instrument is built and it stands astride a SpaceX water mining operation that's just producing tons of water from the Martian subsurface for propellant generation, we would wash away, right? The contamination from the astronaut would go down dramatically as that process.
No, I was now arguing for planetary protection in regards to damaging biosphere on Mars by bringing Earth life there.
Okay.
Although we have exchange of meteorites is not that frequent, and it's possible that the last update of the Martian biosphere by Earth biosphere was 65 million years ago. And because Martian biosphere is much slower, the colder the environment, the slower the evolution, because you have slower replication of bacteria. It can be that the bacteria on Mars are basically 65 million years ago on a biological warfare in microorganisms. So it could be argued that they might be more fragile in some sense, but it's going to happen, and we better look for life before we go there, not postpone not going there.
So should we ask for questions or?
I was just going to make one final comment for questions. I share your concern about the future of the Mars program, the robotic program, because there's, all the eggs are in the sample return basket now, right? And the fundamental problem, which is hard to call a problem, I guess such problems to have, is that the basket is $5 billion a year that NASA gets to spend on solar system exploration, right? And we have a lot going on in that basket because we're, going to Europa, we're going to go back to Titan, we're going back to Venus, we've got active orbiters and other vehicles on Mars, we've got missions to asteroids underway, and aspirations for much more, these proposals that get written every year, right, for new missions. And we are, we're blessed to have $5 billion a year to be doing this, right, compared to anywhere else in the world. And we just, we can't fit more. We can't fit more. Organizations like Mars Society, Planetary Society, we go to Congress, we educate people, no bucks, no Buck Rogers, right? We, try to get the funding increase. And we've been successful as a community of advocates over the past 5 to 10 years, right? As the budget's going up and missions are getting funded and all that. But there's really just only so much we can fit. Sample return is gobbling up the Mars pie right now, but it is intrinsically very important scientifically
But
to get those
I
samples
think is
back.
if we didn't have to deal with planetary protection, we could fit much more.
I'm not sure that's really true. We could fit more. I don't know about the much more part. I just don't know. I
If you
haven't
didn't have to deal
seen
with
the
planetary
quantitative
protection, we
studies.
could have done this mission already. That is, the Curiosity type landing system can land a ton on Mars. Okay, that is enough for a 2-stage return vehicle, a capsule, an MER sized rover. It could do the sample return. We could have done this sample return, 5 years ago. And the instead of waiting for it to be done another decade or so at really a maximum risk mission. It's a maximum technical risk. It's also frankly maximum political risk because you've got a European rover in there and
It's not there anymore.
oh, okay. Not rover, I mean orbiter.
Yeah, Orbiter's there.
Is the orbiter still there?
Yes.
All right, well, that orbiter can go away because, I don't know if you heard, but okay, you've got Italy where they have new prime ministers all the time. We've got England where they have new prime ministers all
Just
the time.
today.
Yeah, well, if they're not even part of no, they are part of the European Space Agency, even though they're not part of the EU. And then the Germans, and then whatever, and that European mission could easily be defunded because of a political change in any one of a dozen countries. And
You use these words like easily.
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
You go to
the-
Mars with the program you got, and that includes. the
Well, no,
politics
I'm
of
saying
that.
it can easily be defunded. It's it's much easier for a mission to die because it has been it only has to be defunded for a year in order to die. It has to be funded continually for the whole period in order to live.
It's true.
So that's what I meant by easily.
Got it.
And if you want to do sample return, you have an obligation to do it as quickly and efficiently as possible because there's a whole number of other priorities that need to be met both within the Mars program and outside of the Mars program and outside of NASA for that matter. And so that this thing is narcissistic. If adding all these requirements to the sample return mission increases its cost by say $3 billion, okay, and then you go to the medical community and you say, we're increasing this mission cost by $3 billion in order to protect the public health of Americans. They say, well, if we had that $3 billion, we could increase the public health of Americans a lot better with ways that have nothing to do with that. And so it's a narcissistic expenditure. Okay, that is that there are. You have to justify expenditures in the context of the full set of priorities that the money could meet. And by enormously inflating the cost of the sample return mission, you damage both the sample return mission and all other missions and a whole bunch of other social priorities. This is, I'm not in agreement with the people who say we shouldn't have a space program because we have all these social needs here, there, and everywhere. Okay, but I'm not going to deny the existence of those social needs. And what that means is that the space program has an obligation to do what it wants to do in the most efficient way possible. Okay, because it's wrong. Okay, it's like Sean O'Keefe saying, I don't want to risk 7 astronauts at a 2% risk of a shuttle failure to rescue the Hubble Space Telescope. Okay, well, so here's the Hubble Space Telescope. It's worth $4 billion. Okay, you're willing to throw away $4 billion against a 2% risk to 7 people, or however many would be on the shuttle on that mission. When $4 billion, if it was given to the highway department, it would save 1,000 lives, as they save a life at $3 million a life. And if there's various other childhood vaccination programs that you can name, that would save much more. Anyway, that's what I'm saying.
I think there's a gang of people biting their tongues,
Yeah,
waiting
yeah,
to
let's-
dive
let's
in
get it up
on
to-
this.
Yeah, okay, let's bring in the philosopher.
Are we unmuted? Yeah.
You know what?
Okay.
They're gonna bring you the mic. Why don't you hang on a second? In front here.
In the front row.
Okay. Who was it? Coming up? Here you go.
Hi, thank you for the talk. Sorry if my question is bigoted, but I'm calculating. So basically, the samples will arrive after the first human will most likely land on Mars.
No.
No.
No, not that, that may happen, but that's not the plan right now.
Okay. Okay, no, because
The
earlier.
plan is for them to come back in 32 or 33, and no, I don't think there's any chance of getting people there before, unless, Elon does some magic, but unlikely.
It's not just Elon.
Well, the
Well,
Chinese. go ahead.
But your NASA's plan would have people go to Mars after that. However, it is true that SpaceX does plan to send people to Mars before that. Whether they will succeed in that remains to be seen. Whether NASA will succeed in getting the sample back by 2032 remains to be seen. Okay, but yeah, those are competing dates, yes.
And also I read some articles from Chinese Space Academy of Sciences where they argue for going to Mars, sending human to Mars 35 or 33, 2033. So it might coincide with the sample return. And I guess your point was if we have human there, right, we can save a lot of money by just bringing in our pockets instead of bringing it,
And a lot more samples, yeah.
of course.
That'd be great. I think it's unlikely.
But it does make the billions invested in Mars sample return, it would make it obsolete at that moment.
So gentlemen, the topic of this conference is heavy lift. So if you had two starships every 2 years going to Mars, what would you do with them? And how would you save money maybe by using heavier stuff since you've got so much heavy lift?
Okay. About a year or actually 2 years ago, I wrote an article in Scientific American addressing this very subject. That is, we have heavy lift coming relatively soon. How could we use this? And I say, well, we need to develop a heavy lander for Mars. And I mean, to ever do human Mars missions, we need a heavy lander. You need a lander capable of landing at least 10 tons, preferably 20. It is just an elementary capability. And now, if you had that before you sent humans, you could send robotic expeditions. And instead of sending, one Curiosity rover, a decade or so, we could land a platoon. It might consist of a couple of heavy rovers and maybe, 12 MER-sized rovers armed with a vast array of instruments and cameras of different types. We could have helicopters. It could, that we could have a laboratory in the lander that the rovers could bring samples back to, and it could be looked at under electron microscopes and all kinds of stuff. You could have an entire robotic expedition. And in fact, on Saturday, we just had a competition of people to design robotic expeditions, and the 6 finalists are going to present their designs. So I forget how many you got. 20 tons on Mars, was that the requirement? Forget the number, but whatever it is, okay, you've landed the LST on Mars. The ramp comes down, the troops come charging out. What do? And I think you could do a lot. And yes, and this would be a greatly expanded form of robotic exploration, and it would also exercise the landing capability in preparation for human expeditions.
Yeah. Bob had my mic shut off. I'm a huge fan of the fantasy land you live in,
Thanks.
Dr. Zubrin. I would love to see that happen. And you're right, from an engineering standpoint, that all of that could happen, which would be delightful. There's no way to pay for it. That's the problem. But other than that, let's start in a more modest way, right?
Okay, am I next?
Right, get one of those things in there, demonstrate the heavy lift capability, get it demonstrated, prove to NASA that it can happen. And then
Okay.
let's all advocate.
Well, if I was to land a heavy lander on Mars, I'd like to land a whole bunch of rovers. And I don't think it costs that much more to make, 6 than 1.
So how much is one perseverance? Just the vehicle?
$2.5 billion.
So 20 billions for platoon?
No, that's not true. The cost of the rover is not the cost of the hardware. Okay, the cost of the hardware in Spirit and Opportunity was utterly trivial. Okay, the compared to the kinds of numbers we're talking about.
Yeah,
here.
it's people.
Yeah, but
Most of the money is people.
yeah, it's
agree.
people, but it's engineering, design, et cetera. And to make 6 identical rovers, okay, does not cost 6 times as much as 1. It doesn't even cost twice as much as 1.
We have empirical evidence from Spirit and Opportunity. It's not 2x. It was something like 1.8x.
That's 2. And
Yeah.
but that's not how it works in the real world. If you design a new kind of car, the first one
Thank you.
costs vastly more than the 10th.
Sure.
Okay.
All right.
Okay,
I got a
I
fun,
guess I'm next.
I got a fun one for the panel here.
Okay,
Reverse experiment. You got paid 10, 15, $20 billion to design an experiment to land as much Earth bacteria as you want on Mars. You get to put as much nutrients in there. You get to put sunlight, doors for the bacteria to crawl in and out however they want. You just go to town and you're just trying as hard as possible to forward propagate. You get this mission, you land it there. How far could these bacteria possibly crawl away from this craft, this experiment? It's such a different hostile environment. I just have a hard time feeling like these bacteria are going to make it that far. Am I being naive?
No, I will answer this question. So bacteria will likely not crawl. They would be dispersed through air. And it would take centuries before we can detect them on the other side. But once you get them there, they will find niches where to survive and replicate very slowly. But yeah, for the first couple of centuries, you will see no difference at all. Yeah. So the point is if we introduce life now or in 50s, it doesn't make a difference from damaging Martian ecosystem by introducing current life forms from Earth to Mars. So there would be not much change. What's the main risk for the life detection? It's going to be a little bit harder to know whether we are detecting the Earth life which we brought last mission, or if we are detecting the indigenous Martians. But as Robert pointed out, with a little bit more work, we can distinguish them.
But let me add to this. First place, we do not know the 4 most important words in science. Second point, those microbes would most likely be desiccated and distributed by dust storms, as Jan has pointed out. Jan's instrument is sufficiently sensitive that we would be able to detect their DNA in an appropriate aquifer if distributed by dust storms. And that would occur relatively quickly because, what the odds, every couple of years, there's a planet-wide dust storm on Mars, give or take. So that would be an issue, right? How many of them would then follow the Jeff Goldblum life finds a way, right? That's a good question. We don't know. They would have to be replicating. In principle, they could replicate. And if you let me choose my microbes, I would get them all out of Antarctica so that they had a leg up on the cold, dry environments, and maybe they would be better. They would have to be, yes, they would have to be UV resistant, at least their spores. And but the answer is we don't really know, but certainly Jan's instrument could detect them quite quickly on the other side of the planet after the first global dust storm or 2.
okay, going to the question again of finding life. You find life in the most unusual places. And I wonder if any of the panels are familiar with Rydberg matter. It's been described by Leif Holmlid in Iceland. I think it's Iceland.
Spell it for us.
Sure. RYD as in dog, B as in boy, ERG, Rydberg matter. Okay, and it is very reactive with amino acids. It's been identified in the vicinity of Mercury and the moon, and it's extremely aggressively attractive to amino acids. And so there's, and I asked Bruce Joukowsky about this at the 2015 at CUA, because I told him, what's with all the stuff that came in from comet sighting spring? Totally unexpected event. So, so I didn't have a name for it, but now it's been discovered in the mesosphere, and Holmlid, HOLMLID, found it. Please look it up. Anyone with phones, look it up, look at the Wikipedia article. There are several peer-reviewed articles about it. And I think it's very curious and interesting.
Check it out.
Okay, hi, I have a question. So I'm an undergrad major and I obviously don't know so much about like life on other planets and stuff. But what you were saying is that you wanted to send a mission without any planetary defense. You're just like, go send it. What makes you think that that sample that we bring back to Earth, what makes you so certain that it won't have another catastrophe like COVID-19 or something like that, that you're willing to bring it to such a,
Okay,
I mean, life.
so this
source
one's
system?
addressed to me. Okay, so if we did a Mars sample return with no planetary protection, okay, why do I think that, or how could I be sure that it doesn't bring back the Red Death from Mars? Okay, there's a couple of reasons. One I've already mentioned. We're already getting unsterilized material being sent to Earth from Mars all the time. So if we could get the Red Death from Mars, we already have. Okay, now, because there is this material being transferred. And that's the fundamental reason. So in other words, the Planetary Protection Officer is in the position of US Customs officers who are being ordered to search the trunks of cars crossing the border from Canada to make sure no tourists are bringing in Canada geese. Okay, when the Canada geese are flying across the border all the time by the millions themselves and have done so for thousands of years or however many years there have been Canada geese. So that's the basic reason why I think. Now, in addition, there is the fact that the Mars surface material, it has no active biosphere in it. It has no liquid water, which is needed to have an active biosphere. And then it is bathed, well, at the very surface by ultraviolet and at some depth by cosmic rays, so that while you might say that spores could survive in surface material completely inactive, provided they were put under a few inches of dirt, given that they would be completely inactive for periods of hundreds of thousands of years at least, because of the lack of liquid water, they would be killed by cosmic rays.
But Robert, I mean, your first argument is the strong one, right? The second argument, you're trying to have it both ways. If we're going to go to Mars to find life.
Well, no, we're going to go to Mars to find life, but the place you're going to find life on Mars is by drilling and reaching a water table. Okay, and that's where you have any reasonable probability of finding life on Mars. Now, okay, now you drill and reach the water table and you bring up liquid water, and conceivably there could be live organisms in it. Okay, it's extremely unlikely that there could be pathogens in it, because pathogens are organisms that have been adapted to our ancestors or their very close relatives over periods of billions of years. Yet we got COVID from bats. We didn't get it from trees. Okay, you know, and I don't know a single person who's ever caught Dutch elm disease. And no, we get it from the species we're relatively closely related to. And so there are no megafauna or megaflora on Mars, or so the idea of pathogens. But once again, that would have to come from the groundwater in the first place. So it's really kind of incredible. But you know where you could get a pathogen from? Gardeners. Okay, because gardeners are constantly bringing sediments to the Earth's surface from the Earth of the past. Okay, and we know for a fact there were diseases on Earth in the past. You dig a few feet, you're bringing in sediments from the time of the Black Death. Okay, and then there's the paleontologists. They're bringing back sediments from the Mesozoic when there were certainly diseases on Earth. So why aren't gardeners and subject to planetary protection regulation?
I think, in my opinion, the argument that, and Steve made it this morning, Mars life doesn't have to be exactly like Earth-like. In fact, if evolution probably would have taken it in a different enough direction that not necessarily compatible. I think, and also if you're looking for a really bad science movie to watch, check out the Andromeda Strain. It's all about this.
So if you want to replace your bad idea of Red Death, actually that was strong argument because that's a name from Robert. You can replace it by bacteria, which would be very good and digesting some methane deposits and releasing the methane from permafrost. So instead of infecting humans, it would be infecting our permafrost regions. So you can write a sci-fi story about that. But for the reasons that we have those rocks coming all the time, that bacteria would be already there. We know for fact that impact ejecta going from Mars back to Earth, those rocks which were ejected were never heated above 40 degrees Celsius. If you had some soil bacteria encapsulated in those rocks, it would survive all the way back home, get dehydrated, flush out, and infect our Earth already. So don't worry about that.
But gardeners.
And also, I should say, scientists at Boston University who engineered coronaviruses to
Give
put
me a
spike
break.
proteins. Right. This is my clam here. We're talking about.
It was a great question to ask. And, you probably run into this all the time. The media bring this up all the time, right?
Yeah.
They want to play into that fear,
Right.
even though scientifically, statistically, the odds are minuscule and so many other risks are larger in life. It's really something that's, the public messaging on this is not good.
I have a question first for Dr. Bell, and then I have a comment for Robert. So the question is, I'm trying to understand a little bit how NASA works as a public institution, because you said they're doing a lot of things, but I like to understand a little bit what their objectives are and what is their system of prioritization. Because if you don't have that in a public institution, it doesn't matter you're doing a million things. If you don't prioritize them to some extent, the fact that you're telling me you're doing a lot of things is not necessarily a plus. So I like to understand the system. I can admit that I don't know how it works. And the comment for Robert is, so you mentioned the possibility of being defunded and like that, and the programs to Mars, and that it can be political, and that could completely discontinue the program. But I think here a public policy expert would say, for this type of public policies to work, usually we think of three things that need to happen. So you need to define sort of the public value of the program. And I think societies like the Mars Society did that. So we understand what the public value would be to bring people to Mars, to understand better Mars. Then you have to have the actual technical and capability to pull it through that particular policy. And luckily, there are people like Elon Musk, there are people at NASA, they're doing that. You have that. You don't have the third, though. And the third is that you need to have an audience for that policy. That's why you risk to be defunded, because you don't have a wide enough audience for the policy. Because by audience, I mean a particular large set of voters that they would care about that. And then you will not have this problem.
Or education.
Okay, so I think the first question was, how does NASA work? And what's the quote? We don't know, is it?
We do know.
We do not know, okay. So I can tell you, let's try to be quick, there's how it's supposed to work, in my experience and opinion. it's supposed to work through understanding what the community thinks is the most important science for NASA and other federal agencies to pursue, and what missions the community thinks science-driven NASA should embark upon. And so every 10 years, NASA commissions a study from the National Research Council, National Science Agency, and it's called the Decadal Survey. And in my community, a couple of thousand people participate. It takes a couple of years of town hall meetings and white papers, and there's a committee of 100 people to try to synthesize and get opinions and inputs and coordinate it all. And they come out with a 700-page document that lists the priorities as judged to be consensus by this panel of 100 experts in that, in my case, planetary science. The astronomers do it, the earth scientists do it, the heliophysicists do it as well, the other divisions of NASA. And so that decadal survey, which is coming from an independent organization outside of NASA, is used by, I know it's used by Congress people, by NASA itself, and by the community to justify the next 10 years of exploration. That's one way that NASA has in the past justified the largest missions, the so-called flagship missions that the agency does: Curiosity, Perseverance, Cassini, Galileo, Magellan, things like these big missions that cost billions of dollars. The other way that NASA works is by listening to the community directly about missions. So smaller class missions, so-called Discovery and New Frontiers missions, are proposed by individual scientists and teams of scientists, engineers, and partners, partnering NASA centers or partnering companies. They're proposed. NASA says, here's how much money you can spend: $500 million. You can spend $800 million. Don't go over that cost cap. You tell us what you want to do with that money and tell us where it fits in our priorities and in national, international priorities. And those programs have produced, 20-ish amazing missions that we've all heard of that are cheaper than the giant flagship ones and very, very community driven. That's how it's supposed to work. And in general, it kind of works that way, but superimposed upon that is politics. Superimposed upon that is the fact that there are 10 NASA centers spread around the country, and the senators and congressmen associated with those want business for those centers, want prestige for those centers. So headquarters has to care and feed and spread the wealth around. And that can change priorities of programs. In NASA speak, they call it programmatic decisions. And those of us in the trenches don't understand often where these things come from. But a programmatic decision has been made, maybe because Senator X was concerned about not enough funding being spent in their state or whatever. And so that's an imprint on top of what should be an idealistic, holistic, wonderful process bubbling up from the community that lets NASA, that dictates what NASA should do. So yes, politics is imprinted upon this. I still think it's working, and we're doing incredible things.
So basically, a number of plausible ideas are proposed and they roll dice. But okay, but I mean, it's kind of like that. Yeah, but the missions they choose are reasonable. They're not necessarily the best ones. It's not really clear how the decision was made. Because, for instance, if you were to take sample return, there's certainly a lot of Mars scientists who think we should do sample return. There's also a lot of Mars scientists who think the money would be better spent on having a plethora of exploration missions with rovers and orbiters and what you have. Sure. Okay, and then somebody gets to decide, somehow certain scientists are judged to be more important than other scientists, and they are the more senior scientists, and they are the ones who say, this is the right decision and that is not. And anyway, but nevertheless, what does happen out of that is a plausible decision is made. Okay, that is, for instance, in the case of the Mars program, where a plausible decision is sample return, another plausible decision is lots of rovers and orbiters, and they take one or the other. Okay, a completely stupid idea that would be unscientific or unphysical or something doesn't get past that process. Okay. Then you asked a question for me, and I forget what it was.
Where's the audience?
Well, where's the audience?
Yeah.
Okay, look, let me tell you something. Okay. The United States has the biggest space program in the world. I believe NASA is about 5 times the size of ESA or something like that.
It's larger than all of the other rest of the world combined.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, it's larger than the rest of the world combined, and I've been saying 5 times the size of ESA, given that ESA is based on an economy and population that is actually somewhat larger than the United States. Okay, so why is it that Americans support this great space program? Okay, it's certainly better than anybody else's by far. Okay, you know,
But it's more than that, Bob. I
but,
mean.
well, but
what-
no, but wait a second. Let me just answer the question. Okay, it is, okay, you know, the 100% of all the people that have walked on the moon, 100% of all the, well, not 100% anymore. Now there's a Chinese rover on Mars, but
Yes,
up
there
until
is.
recently, 80% of all rovers that have rolled on Mars, and 100% of all probes that have gone to, you know, Neptune and so forth have all been American. Okay. So we support American people support a really great space program. And I believe that the reason why they do it, okay, is because for all its flaws and whatever happens, and sometimes missions fail and this and that, and sometimes there are programs that don't appear to make sense or are dragging on too long or this or that, they see NASA and the program it represents as the bridge from this world to the Star Trek future. Okay, that there's Americans believe in the endless frontier. They do. Okay, and it is part of the faith. They believe there needs to be a place beyond where the rules have been written. There needs to be a place where the rules haven't been written yet. That this is a fundamental necessity that there be that kind of open future. Okay, and this is a somewhat unique belief structure. Okay, to other countries. Okay, and so, you know, when I go in front of a public audience that is not a bunch of space cookies, but, you know, a plumbers convention or something, and I present the Mars Direct plan. Okay, the main comment I get is, how come this hasn't been done yet? Okay, this is the sort of thing this country ought to be doing. Okay, you know, they say, I remember Apollo. Weren't we supposed to go to Mars after that? What happened? Okay, that is their expectation from the space program. And the human space program in particular has lived on the sufferance, the infinite patience of the American people. Say, well, that was great, and aren't you supposed to do more of that kind of stuff? And we're waiting, and they're willing to wait at $10 billion a year on the manned space program, racking up on the taxi meter. And so there's a lot of support for this. If an American president was to say, okay, here's the idea, we're going to have humans on Mars in 10 years, people say, well, now that's the kind of space program we want. Okay, but believe me, that would be what they want. They wouldn't be saying, well, shouldn't we postpone for at least 20 more years so that the scientists can do their work in peace? No, they say, this is it. So I don't think that's the issue at all. The public is not our problem. Okay, the public is that we have not had the kind of bold political leadership that we had in the 60s ever since. That is capable of doing so. You know, Kennedy committed us to go to the moon. We didn't have a clue of how we were going to go to the moon in 1961. We didn't even, we had 15 minutes of human space flight experience. We didn't even know if people could eat in space. And he committed us to be on the moon in 8 years. And he said, we're going to do this. And you know how I know we can do this? Because this is America, we can do anything.
But in 1996, when David McKay said that there was Martian organisms, cells in a Martian meteorite, William Jefferson Clinton, the president of the United States, went to the podium. I do work in diagnostics, cancer, and aging research. Not a single discovery that I will ever make in those fields, which pay the bills in my lab, will ever get the president of the United States to a podium. This does.
Hope you're wrong.
Gents, I appreciate your time here tonight. I've got a question about if we discover, maybe not if, but when the extant life on Mars is validated and the potential for the press and others to kick up a storm about not then exploring Mars and making it, somewhat of an international or cosmic park. How do we fight that to continue exploration of the red planet?
I'll try to answer. Try to imagine that we first send astronauts and then we find the life. And then they will start to ask questions why we haven't found the life before we send the astronauts. It could, so if life is there, we are going to find it at some point. So the storm is coming regardless if it's coming.
Yeah, it's a great question. And, partly, I think the answer is education. I think the answer is, helping folks who have such concerns understand that if we have found life, it's probably in a very special place, probably a rare place on Mars. Maybe we had to dig extremely deep, drill extremely deep, or go to a place like a gully where groundwater might be coming out occasionally. And those are really rare places and very localized places on Mars. I think the argument could be made that, if life is there, and it could be there, it's in these niche environments, hunkered down, protected from the harsh surface, tapping into some dwindling supply of groundwater on a desiccating planet. So, I think education, like getting people informed, the struggle is that that's not what the media is going to want to do, right? They just want the sensational story.
I don't know. I think it's a little bit more nuanced. If you have life anywhere, it would be distributed by the dust storms. So it might be everywhere, but at low concentrations. So it might be like in some oases, as you just mentioned, but it's going to be distributed everywhere very sparsely.
And dead everywhere else.
Well, not necessarily. To be protected from UV, you just need a millimeter of dust. And if you spread the bacteria through the same way how you spread bacteria through Atacama Desert, you spread it by wind at night, because during the day you sterilize it. But if you put it in some crack, bacteria survives. So,
Reasonable hypothesis, and speculation is fun.
well,
Greg Autry.
we don't know.
Greg, why don't you talk?
So I have a real question, actually. We've talked about whether Elon's going to get your sample first, or whether the sample return mission is going to get the, but let me ask you about another option. We've talked about how you could spread spores or whatever, and whether life is alive or not isn't important. You could detect life that was recently alive or was live at some point. That still answers the question. The mission that I'm interested in is the Japanese MMX mission, which is going to launch in 2 years and bring back a sample in 2029. And I believe that date is pretty close. What do you think the odds are of grabbing some material from Phobos they tend to bring back and detect life in that? Because of course the leading edge of Phobos is just painted orange because it's covered with Martian ejecta. What do you think about that?
Yeah, again, a reasonable hypothesis. It'll be an interesting sample set. That whatever life is there has had to go through a hell of a ride to get there, and it's in an extremely harsh environment. But there's apocryphal stories of astronauts bringing stuff back from the moon from surveyors that still had evidence of contamination from Earth on them, even in a harsh vacuum. So,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm very excited about it as well, because I don't think that any of that material has experienced extreme temperatures in terms of the ejection and the collection on Phobos. It's deep frozen, so, and as
it's
long
going
as
through
it-
extreme temperatures on Phobos
That, well, that's
Yeah,
true. I
yeah.
guess the point is that if
day
it's,
and night, but
yeah, it has day and night, but
Yeah.
it's, yeah, no, that's true. I have
Yeah.
to think about it.
yeah. But you're right, those samples could come back before the end of the decade. Be cool.
Hello. I wanted to go back to one of the first points that you made about not looking specifically for life on Mars and not having designed experiments that could detect life. Do you think there's an active incentive to maintain ambiguity in astrobiological research because it doesn't get the funding?
Yep.
I'm
So
sorry, explain
young
that to me. Yeah.
Maintain ambiguity. So
Yeah, but-
young to be such a pessimist. Wow.
But explain, no, just amplify that for 2 sentences. So what would be the advantage to me as a person seeking funds to maintain ambiguity?
So sending experiments that advance the search for life, but that did not allow a yes or no question. Do you think that allows to maintain funding in the long term?
Well, you can never answer the no question.
No, but there are people who say that we know how to cure cancer today, but we're not doing it
Mm-hmm.
because that means that the National Cancer Institute would no longer fund our research.
Hmm.
My understanding of the incentives that drive individual scientists does not support that model. Because I believe that if somebody does find life on Mars, their major problem will be that they are being professionally attacked. Right, they will have to manage the problem. The same thing with cancer. That's how science works.
Yeah.
There would be an attack. But I don't think that anybody consciously is motivated to not find an answer that's before them because they want the continuation of their grant to be on the same topic. There's always another topic to do. Once I discover life on Mars, I have another research program to characterize it
Oh.
and then to sequence its
Right.
genome. And then
I think the question was from top bottom, not from scientists up.
Hmm.
I don't know if you want to touch
Maybe.
on
I mean,
this.
there are a lot of checks and balances in the system. It's kind of like what Dr. Zubrin said,
I guess you don't want to talk about
wacko ideas tend to get filtered out and conspiracies. There's so many people involved in these decisions. It'd be hard to hide a conspiracy like
I
that.
would say it's
Yeah.
maybe plausible conspiracy because after we return results which were interpreted as negative from Viking mission, we had like loss of interest in Mars. So actually looking for life might be dangerous. But again, maybe ask tomorrow Pam Melroy directly.
There you go.
Well,
There you go.
what first of all, I don't think there's any such conspiracy, but what I do think is that the science community, a lot of it are disconnected from the public's interest in Mars. That is, a lot of these scientists are fascinated by intricate questions that would not occur to be of interest to most people. And, I can remember the Pathfinder mission, okay, which was the mission that dropped delivered the Sojourner rover to Mars. 1997, it landed. And I went to a lot of the planning meetings for that mission. And there were two things about the mission that the Mars scientists hated. Okay. What was it about the mission you think they hated the most? Sojourner, absolutely. This is public relations. This is just JPL, appealing to the public, blah, blah, blah. Okay. What do you think was the thing they hated the second most? The camera. Because it was the instrument that returned images. Once again, it's public relations, pictures of Mars. Okay. Now the APX, the spectrometer, the seismic instrument. Now those were quantitative. That was something.
You are painting Mars scientists with a broad brush, sir.
Okay. Well,
I am
no.
not in
and
that
look, I was at the
population.
meetings. I
Me
can
and my
tell you
colleagues are
that they were there griping about that damn rover. And And more recently, I hear them griping until very recently, but the Ingenuity helicopter, okay, right,
It's the same people.
okay.
Yep.
But but in other words, the thing is see, it's for the same reason that medieval philosophers wrote in Latin instead of in the vernacular. Okay, the discussion is within the priesthood. Okay, and things that are comprehensible to the public, and of course, the form of science that is comprehensible, planetary science is comprehensible to the public, is the images. Okay, and so that was the least appealing to them. So here's the thing: the issue with the public's interest in Mars is there life there? Was there life there? And also, will there be life there? Okay, those are, can't, you know, in terms of the scientific issues, it's the question, it's the astrobiological question, and then there's the question of a human future on Mars. Those are the images. It's clear that those questions are not what is preoccupying the Mars exploration scientific community. Okay, it isn't. Okay, if it was, if they were passionately interested in is there life on Mars, they would they would have constructed an exploration program that was focused on that. And exactly what that would be, I don't know, but I believe they would be doing drilling. They were doing all sorts of things. They'd perhaps have other life detection experiments, maybe be able to go back and do a Viking kind of thing, but we learned from Viking and now we're going to eliminate the ambiguities and be able to do it again right, and so forth. But they're not. So that's what I think. I don't think there's a conspiracy not to find life on Mars, but I don't think there's a passionate interest within the priesthood to find life on Mars.
My mother taught me, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all.
Hi, so so my question is, like, say we find life on Mars, what how do we name it? Like
Alf. Well, there's also Marvin is another.
yeah, it's like on Earth we have a classification systems for species where we have like the genus name and a family name, like the whole binomial nomenclature thing. That's the only thing I remember from biology
So
last year.
usually discoverers can put their name into the name of the bacteria they discover. So if you are first to find life on Mars, you can put your name maybe in its, you know, second name.
There's a book by Peter Ward which addresses this question. Who's the name of the title of this book? I don't remember, because the only title I remember of his is Rare Earth, and it says not that book. There's another book. But yeah, so he calls all the stuff that we do Synthia. That's the genus name for synthetic biology. But he has a name for life that comes from Mars, and whether there is no international community that has adopted his scheme, but there is one out there. Interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to touch back on that contamination issue. So we have already successfully landed quite a few rovers on the surface of Mars. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's not a way to guarantee that there's no contamination being introduced. So what do you think is the chance that we already have contaminated Mars? And my second question is, in case we do find life on Mars, I think that would be one of the biggest discoveries in the science history, if not the biggest. How do you think that will effectively change humans' perspective? Yeah.
Okay. Well, the chance that we've delivered life to Mars is 100%. Okay. I worked at Martin, and the standard of the Viking landers was less than 200,000 bacteria per square inch. Okay. So, you know, that requirement was met. Okay. Okay. So, yeah, but the chances are also very high that those bacteria got sterilized. by the conditions on Mars, the ultraviolet, the lack of any water for them to try to multiply while they were taking casualties. But also I believe that the Earth has transferred material to Mars over the billions of years. I think KT impact must have splashed Mars. I think other impacts splashed Mars. I've been at Devon Island. There's a crater there, 23 kilometers in diameter. It's not even one of the classic mass extinction craters, but it's a damn big crater, and I'm sure. But anyway, so we've been transferring material to Mars over this time. I think the term contaminated is a bit pejorative. That is that when you introduce life to it, like you'd say, you fertilize the plant. But but anyway, material from Earth has gone to Mars, but I think that if there's life on Mars, it's in the groundwater and it's been immune from terrestrial influence, unless it originally came from the Earth and then went down into the groundwater while there was still liquid water on the surface of Mars.
Yeah, from the point of analytical chemistry, is not yes, no question, is how much of the contaminants we have. So the lower the amount, the easier it's going to be find local Martians.
Yeah, and on your second question, I mean, what are we doing this for, right? It's because, are we alone? Are we alone, right? And if there's another place in our solar system where the conditions were similar early in the history of its planetary evolution and life evolved there, or life was transmitted there from some other source, and there's evidence that it persisted and survived in that specific environment, and then there's two places in our solar system, and then we go eventually discover Europa and find interesting little buggies floating in that ocean, and then there's three places in one solar system. Well, then damn it, it's everywhere. It's everywhere, right? And what is that going to do to the human psyche? I don't know. It depends on whether you're optimist or pessimist about the human psyche. But if you're an optimist, I think it's uplifting, it's inspirational, and it's motivational to get us out there among the stars eventually.
There was a Library of Congress meeting about 2016 where they had a bunch of people coming together, including Sanskrit, religious, Buddhists, Catholics, Protestants, and I was a scientist on this panel. You can go discuss exactly this question. There are 3 days of discussions. They're on YouTube, and you can spend your time reading them and listening to them.
Going over here.
Given that Mars has a surface this same order of magnitude as the entire land surface of Earth and our resources are limited, what does the panel think is the low-hanging fruit? Where and how should we first look for life on Mars with our limited resources? Should we track methane spikes? Should we look in lava tubes and caves? Should we develop the capability to drill into deep water deposits? If we can't do everything, what should we do first?
I think we should deploy ground penetrating radar to try to detect a Martian water table and try to find a place where a liquid water table is within drilling distance of the surface and go there and drill.
I also today suggested a mission which would look for life deposited in mid-latitude glaciers, which were deposited during the last warm period around 1 million years ago. So if life existed anywhere on the surface, it would be deposited in that ice and we could find it there. For example, on Earth, if you look into polar glaciers or any glaciers, you can find life samples from entire surface of Earth deposited there by wind currents. And you can, it's very sparse, but my point of the talk was if you have large enough sample and concentrate genetic polymers, something like DNA, maybe alien DNA, you can find life in that ice quite easily. That's in combination with heavy lift vehicles which are going to refuel on site. So that's my approach, how to answer your question.
Yeah, drill, baby, drill. get deep, get below the harsh surface, get down where there might be liquid water because of the thermal gradient. If we can't drill, then let's go to some of these gullies or places in the canyon walls where groundwater might be seeping out and be accessible to future missions.
Last question.
I wrote my question down. Now, as a member of the press, I just want to say how all day I've heard talk about engaging systems and dealing with conditions and adapting to them as you work to have them adapt to you. But the problem is that many of the people who are space representatives and boosters, they need translators. I mean, you alluded to this, Dr. Zubrin. I worked for a federal engineering agency and they couldn't speak a sentence without dropping in a couple of formulas or patting themselves on the back. And my job was to translate, but sometimes they went around me because they felt like I was in their way. I was an unnecessary filter. And so what the media does is the media, took what they told them and, they write in ways to capture attention. And they know that what they get is not always translatable and the media exists to fill vacuums. So, I mean, I'm not sure that's always the media's fault.
Right. It's the fault of lack of proper education in our society. We need a population which is better scientifically educated so it can evaluate stories in the media and not be deceived either by stories that are too alarmist or stories that are too credulous.
Yeah, I agree. And, places like ASU and other universities, we're working on both science education of the masses in general, but also really good education of future journalists and media people who will be covering science. Get them, more familiar with the kinds of topics they'll be covering, with some of the jargon, how to do that translation, how to write well for the public and do that translation from the scientific literature. A number of my past students have gone on to be, work in media, and those are totally reasonable career options now for students going through STEM pathways. So yeah, education is the key.
The motivation of Manifest Destiny has caused a water crisis because of the climate change. Do you really think the motivation of Manifest Destiny for space will not cause similar problems that could lead to extinction?
Well, I don't know how the manifest destiny of the 1800s led to climate change, but manifest destiny of the 1800s certainly did lead to the displacement of Native American societies and destruction of bison herds and redwood forests and many things like this. And its replacement by a continental nation of 300 million people that features liberty and universities and used bookstores. And so something grand was destroyed, something grand was created, and people can debate whether the trade was worth it or not. But if there had been nothing here then, or say when Columbus landed, but a vast desert with no Native Americans, no bisons, no redwood forests, just an endless desert with perhaps some bacteria in the groundwater. And then we replaced it with a continental nation of liberty with 300 million people and responsible for all sorts of inventions and intellectual innovations and the defeating fascism and all that. Would there be people picketing Columbus Day parades today? I don't think so. So that's the difference. What we did here was an act of destruction and an act of creation at the same time. On Mars, we can do it with clean hands.
I'd like to see that.
Hey, brother. Amen.
Okay, so we're going to wind it up there. Thank you very much.
That's great questions, everybody.
So I got a question for you. So
Thank you, everyone. So this concludes our evening program. Our gracious and wonderful hosts at ASU have asked us to please clear the room so that we can lock up for the day. We'll see you all tomorrow at 9 a.m.
How far does it go down? I mean, what
Thank you.
Temperature gradient? And also, is the orbiter photo in
solar system plane, or is it tipped sufficient that you have a sun